The second batch of college football playoff rankings have come out. We'll discuss that, but more importantly, dive into this scenario. What if 7 SEC teams finish the regular season 10-2? It's actually not as crazy of a possibility as you think. It's coming up next here on Verts. I'm Harrison Graham. Welcome into Verts, where we talk about the NFL and college football here on a daily basis. And with just a few weeks left in the regular season, chaos could ensue in the Southeastern Conference for A, who plays in the SEC championship game, but B, which teams are going to end up making the new 12-team college football playoff. Chaos is always fun in college football, but this year it could really get chaotic. So we'll dive into that here in just a second. And listen, this channel has been launched for about 3-4 months now, and it's been primarily an NFL channel. And I'm kind of just following what the subscribers are telling me. We have more NFL subscribers than college football ones. I know a lot of you guys like both sports, but if you want us to talk more college football here on this show, we need more college football subscribers. So hit that subscribe button if you want us to crank up our CFP content. All right, let's first take a look at the bracket after last night. The Oregon Ducks still the number 1 overall seed. Despite falling in the rankings, Miami is still the 4 seed because they are the projected ACC champion as of now. Texas moves up to the 2 seed. BYU sitting as the 3 seed. They're 6th overall in the rankings, but again, projected Big 12 champ. You got Tennessee, Notre Dame in the 8-9 matchup. That would feed into a matchup with Oregon. Ohio State, Boise State, which would feed into a game against Miami, Indiana, Alabama, and then Penn State, Ole Miss as the other round of 16 matchups. That's where things sit right now. All right, I want to dive into this SEC chaotic scenario that could ensue. And I'm just going to go team by team here. Texas, they have 3 games left. They currently have 1 loss. At Arkansas, Kentucky at home, at Texas A&M. Tennessee also with 1 loss, plays at Georgia this week. That's obviously massive. UTEP at home, and then at Vandy to finish up. Alabama, Mercer at Oklahoma, Auburn at home. Ole Miss at Florida versus Mississippi State. Both those 2 teams, Alabama and Ole Miss, have 2 losses. Georgia with 2 losses, Tennessee this week, UMass next week, and then Georgia Tech. Texas A&M with 2 losses, New Mexico State at Auburn, and then the big one against Texas at home. And then Mizzou, who I don't think is in the same tier. These other teams, they would need some help even if they do go 10-2, I believe. But it's on the table. They're 7-2 at South Carolina, at Mississippi State, and then Arkansas this week. So you ask yourself, is it possible for all 7 teams to go 10-2? It actually is. And essentially this is what would need to happen. Texas would have to lose that game to A&M, and obviously both teams win their other games. Both teams would finish 10-2 in that scenario. Tennessee loses at Georgia, but wins their other 2 games. Bama wins out. No tough games remaining. Ole Miss wins out. 2 pretty easy games remaining. Georgia has to beat Tennessee this week, obviously, and then win their final 2 games. And then Texas A&M's got to win their next 2 and then beat Texas in their regular season finale. And then Mizzou obviously has to win out as well. Now, is that likely to happen? No. But based on the matchups, is it that crazy? Like if Georgia beats Tennessee at home this week, I don't think anyone would consider that crazy. They both have 2 losses. If A&M beats Texas in a few weeks, they would have the same amount of losses unless one of them suffered a pretty big upset. Like this could get pretty chaotic here. And then you got to figure out what are all the tiebreakers to see who makes the SEC championship game, which teams get into the 12-team college football playoff. All 7, unlikely. I think Mizzou probably loses to South Carolina this week. 5 or 6, though, being 10-2, that is very much on the table at this point in the season. What do you guys think? How many SEC teams will end up making the college football playoff? We were debating this earlier. I feel like 5 is probably where we settle at. But if 6 teams end up 10-2, a 6th team could sneak in there, depending on what happens in the other conferences, especially the Big Ten. Like, is the Big Ten going to be a 4-team league or a 2 or 3-team league? We'll have to wait and see. All right, let's just dive into some other wild college football playoff scenarios because we're getting down the stretch here. We got about 3 weeks here. Number 1, the one we just broke down, 6 or more teams finish 10-2 in the SEC. No more analysis needed there. Number 2, and I think a pretty realistic one, BYU finishes 12-0 in the regular season. but then they lose in the Big 12 championship game to either Colorado, Iowa State, Kansas State, whoever it is. What happens? Does BYU still get an at-large at 12-1? I think they'd have a pretty strong argument to get in there. They have a non-conference win against SMU. They would have a couple of ranked wins in conference because whoever they lose to would get a top 4 seed and an automatic berth. So that's a potentially bid-stealing situation from that 6th SEC team, for example. That could come into play. Indiana, what if they go 11-1? But they get blown out by Ohio State? Because I think most people think in the SEC or Big Ten, although I think the Big Ten's being a little overhyped right now, that if you go 11-1 in either of those two conferences, you're a lock. But if you look at Indiana's schedule, and I'm rooting for them, by the way, awesome story, love Cignetti and their coach and everything, but if they go 11-1 and their only real tough test, they just get destroyed, like, do they still get in? I mean, I think they'd still have a strong argument, but I don't know. Like, I think one of those 2-loss SEC teams would probably have a stronger one. So I think that could be an interesting scenario. I think if they play Ohio State close or even within 10, 14 points, 11-1 Indiana's in. But what if they lose like 42-3? I mean, that's going to be pretty interesting to see what would happen there. Number 4, what if Army beats Notre Dame this week? I think it would knock Notre Dame out. I think that's pretty clear because their 2 losses would be Northern Illinois and Army. I don't think the win over Texas A&M would be able to overcome that. But could Army close the gap on Boise State, who we'll talk about in a second? If Boise wins the Mountain West, I think most people assume they would just be the Group of 5 team represented. But if Army goes undefeated, wins their conference in the American, and beats Notre Dame, would they have a stronger argument? Because Boise, I think, is a really good team. I loved Ashton Genty, but their best resume block is a 3-point loss to Oregon. Army would have a top 10 road win over Notre Dame. So it does get interesting. And also, what happens to the Army-Navy game in this scenario? Because Army-Navy is a week after Championship Saturday. It's after the college football playoff determines who the 12 teams are. Like, what do you do in that situation? Because they could lose to Navy. Navy's pretty good this year. It's a rivalry game. So, again, just scenarios, but I think that one's one that's not being talked about enough. If they win this week against Notre Dame, start talking about Army. It's going to be interesting. And then lastly, what if Boise loses one more game? Like, Army loses this week to Notre Dame, Boise loses again. Can they still hang on? They would have 2 losses. Washington State, who has 1 loss, could leapfrog them. They did lose to Boise head-to-head. Wazoo did. So you kind of get into this, okay, 2 losses versus 1. Boise, do we punish them for scheduling Oregon and losing that game close? Like, I would still lean Boise in that scenario, but I don't know. Especially, and I will say this, if Army runs the table and Boise loses again, I do think at that point Army should leapfrog them. Undefeated win over Notre Dame. But if Army were to lose and Boise were to lose a second time, that's when it gets interesting for the Group of 5 spot or Group of 6 spot now. All right, for this week, game of the week, pretty simple to tie it back to the SEC. Tennessee at Georgia. Nico Iamaleava, the Volunteers quarterback, is questionable concussion protocol. Josh Heupel has said he expects him to be fine. Others have reported that he's not expected to play, so who knows? Feels like a coin flip at this point. That's obviously a big deal in terms of just the outlook of this game. If he doesn't play, feels like it'll be tough for Tennessee to win this game. I think if you're someone who wants to eliminate some of the chaos, you should want Tennessee to beat Georgia this week because that would be Georgia's 3rd loss, and that would be a lot to overcome. But if you're Team Chaos, Georgia wins. That's only going to add to the muddy waters with just a few weeks left to go. All right, I love college football. Hopefully you guys do too. And if you do, and if you enjoyed this show, hit that subscribe button. We're here every single day covering the NFL, covering college football, my takes and analysis on everything surrounding both sports. So if you're interested in that, hit that subscribe button. Like the video on the way out. We'll see you guys next time.